And then I will also live stream it. Oh, here's Aaron's here too. That's excellent. Let me just get this live stream going. Let me see here. Cool. All right, live stream's on. All right, thank you all for coming. So this presentation is, you can only get credit for it if you are actually here in person or, you know, over Zoom asking questions. So I will send a link to our survey near the end of the talk, and then you can fill out the survey and get your CE certificate. We do also want to keep these continuing education events free and accessible to all. So if you could donate, that would be wonderful. You can donate at ouronor.org/donate or Venmo at ouronor. And yeah, so Cynthia has a PhD and a postdoctoral degree in zoology, animal behavior, and cognition from Oxford University, and extensive experience in data analysis and global health research, specifically in the areas of metrics and effectiveness of interventions. She has developed several research projects for research institutions in the UK, USA, and Brazil, and authored over 70 scientific publications, books, book chapters, and educational materials. Additionally, she has taught data analysis and experimental design for researchers in the biomedical field for several years. She also has a Master's of Science degree in ecology and has done extensive work on the impacts of animal agriculture. So thank you very much, Cynthia, for coming. And I have to run to do an interview, so I'll let you take it away. And I might make Aaron or Larea a co-host just in case something happens while I'm gone, but I should be back in like 10 minutes. So take it away, Cynthia. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon or morning, everyone. I'm sorry for my voice. I'm down with a respiratory bug. I don't know which one. So it's very hard for me to keep talking continuously for like 40, 50 minutes. So I'll play a recording of exactly what I intended to say that I had from a couple of weeks. And but I'll be following, and if you wish, you can type in questions in the chat box. And about 15 minutes before the hour, I will stop and you can ask me questions. So I think I'm okay for answering questions. It's just that I cannot speak for a very, very long time with this voice. It would be unpleasant for you as well. So I'll share my screen, and please someone let me know if you can see the presentation and the lecture, and you can hear it too. You can hear it well. Okay. All right, so we usually start with some questions for you to understand the type of problems we are addressing in this project. So, for example, this is a common question for advocates and for legislators, which is associated with more suffering. Tail without analgesia, it's a painful procedure, or the wounds emerging from tail biting in adult pigs and growing pigs that have kept their tails intact. So it's a common trade-off for which the answer is not straightforward. Or a short life marked by disease and impairment, for example, as a result of fast growth. This could be in farm fish or chickens, or a longer life with a slower growing breed in slightly better welfare, but under conditions that are still far from ideal. So this would be a net negative life with problems that are not so intense, but that still exist. Which is worse?
Or still, if we go to the supermarket, what is worse in terms of suffering embedded in the animal source products? 6 eggs, a whole chicken, a pound of pork meat, a pound of beef? We don't know. And how much animal suffering in general can be averted with different reforms, different campaigns, asks, policies, funding strategies, and so on. So, for example, with more welfare-friendly housing systems, with a ban of cages and crates, for example, or with the use of different stunning techniques, the replacement of water bath stunning by CO2 stunning, or a different method of stunning. In the case of farmed fish or farmed shrimp, by improving water quality, dissolved oxygen levels, or by reducing stocking density. Or, as I said, setting limits to the growth rate of different breeds, adopting slower growing breeds. Or by banning bodily mutilations such as the tail docking, surgical castration, debeaking, etc., etc. And we could also think in terms of questions that we have in terms of policies, environmental policies, economic policies, developmental policies, and so on. So, for example, for each acre of land or kilo of carbon emission spared with policies that may end up favoring the intensification of animal farming, how much more animal suffering is caused? So that's a problem. There is a trade-off between environmental policies and animal welfare consequences. Or how taxes and subsidies connected to different welfare standards can be properly valued. How can we place a monetary value into this different welfare standards? We need a quantification of animal welfare for that. Or even in other settings, other than farmed animals, in research settings, for example, what are the benefits for humans emerging from animal research? How can we value them against the costs that the animals are bearing? So these are all questions that we try to address in this project, and that's the reason why the project was born. It's, as I said, the work of a duo, Vladimir and I. And we are zoologists, evolutionary biologists, but we also spent many years, about 12 to 14 years, working on global health in different projects. And as you know, in global health, we have a very strong focus on quantifying different types of problems like mortality, the different burden of different diseases, morbidity, and so on. And I think this is still lacking in the animal welfare sciences. So in a sense, we brought that approach to the analysis, to the assessment of animal welfare. And we did conduct, this project started in 2018 with a pilot work on pig welfare. And at the time, we conducted a very broad review of the literature to see if there was anything that we could use to quantify animal suffering and animal welfare in general. And there are indeed a number of very good animal welfare assessment models, but they are more restricted in terms of scope. They are usually tailored for auditing at the farm level, verifying compliance in different levels, but they cannot be used for the type of comparison I was just talking about, to comparing different types of harms, the impact of different types of policies with a universal metric that anyone can understand. They are typically scored-based models where the nature of the output, the score, is very abstract, and the association with the affective experiences of the animals is more opaque. So the project was born based on this recognition that we needed a biologically meaningful metric of suffering that we could use for comparisons. So to quantify and compare the magnitude of suffering associated with different issues, policies, interventions, and so on, asks, campaigns, etc. To integrate animal welfare into this social issues, social policies, environmental concerns, economic analysis, social welfare functions, and so on. as well as to raise awareness for the general public about how much suffering, the magnitude of suffering embedded in each unit of animal source product, with a metric that anyone can understand. So in each egg, in each liter of milk, in each pound of meat, and so on. So the Welfare Footprint Project seeks exactly that, to quantify animal suffering due to the different challenges and living conditions that the animals endure. And our focus is mostly on farmed animals, but the project, the method can be applied to research animals, wild animals, companion animals, and so on, even to humans. And then to help determine the most effective courses of action to improve their well-being. Long-term goal, something we would love to see at the end of our lives. I don't know if this will be possible, but it's a goal. We want to contribute towards that goal, is to help create a world where pain or any unpleasant state or experience shifts from this more abstract concept to a measurable concept where pain and suffering can be extensively mapped in the different circumstances where it happens. Okay, so how do we measure suffering? And the first thing we do is to try to understand exactly what is happening to the animal. So this may seem trivial and simple, but it's very important. And it's important not only for the assessment framework that we use, but for any assessment framework. We have been collaborating with a number of groups, and some groups have benefited a lot by starting, when we start the collaboration, by starting to map everything that happens to the animal in the production chain that they are studying, or in the ecosystem that they are studying, or in the lab setting that they're studying. So, for example, here we have the case of the electrical water bath stunning of broiler chickens. It's just a brief moment of their lives. We can focus on a moment or the entire life cycle of the animal. But in this case, we were focusing on this moment. And then we have here the moment where they are in the crates, 5 to 10 minutes before being transported to the slaughter line. Then they are hanged, inverted and hanged. Then they are moved in the slaughter line. Then they are stunned in the electrical water bath, and so on. Their necks are cut, they bleed, and then they are scalded. So understanding what happens and how long each of these phases last can be very insightful. In this case, it's simple, but in other cases, it's not as simple as this. Now, once you have this industrial process mapped, then you can begin to identify the welfare harms, the effective harms that the animals endure during this process. So, for example, in this phase here, when they're moving in the line, you can have fractures, for example, wing fractures, because they struggle in the line. You can have fear, the compression of the lungs because they are inverted and then there's pressure, the compression of the legs. Some animals are heavier, some animals have lameness and so on. So this is an issue as well. And then we have the identification of all these harms. And you understand why it's important to identify each of the problems that the animals endure later when I talk more about the method. And this can be done also for entire production chain. So, for example, let's say we wanted to understand the amount of suffering embedded in a kilo of pork meat. In that case, for the welfare footprint of pork meat, we would need to map the entire production chain, like in a life cycle analysis. So we would need to see the types of animals involved in production. Here, market pigs, female breeders, pre-slaughter mortalities, male breeders, and so on. If there are animals that are used as feed, we can include them as well in the boundaries of this analysis. We call them life fates. We have different life fates. And for each of these life fates, we need to understand their entire life cycle, what happens from birth to death, and within each life cycle, the processes, as I mentioned, and within each of these stages, then we need to understand what type of welfare harms they can endure, even if not all animals endure, even if it's only a percentage of animals that endure these harms. So, for example, here we have the case of sows, the female breeders in intensive systems. From when they are born, they suffer a number of mutilations. Then in the nursery stage, growth stage, then pre-puberty, then they are transported to another farm, and they go through a cycle of repeated conception, gestation, and farrowing. In the intensive system, it's usually in gestation rates. And the width of these bars here represents the time that they spend in each of these stages. And of course, each of the stages is associated with a number of welfare problems. So they endure the deprivation of highly motivated behaviors, lameness, wounds, skin wounds, gastric ulcers, respiratory problems, pneumonia, the problems associated with farrowing, and so on. There are multiple problems. And I'll show you here a video. We are planning on releasing a platform where this is made interactive, so people can understand the production process and navigate through it, different types of production processes, different phases, and then understand the issues that the animals endure using this sort of tool. If you cannot see it well, just let me know. So here we have 4 types of production system, and someone could navigate in these systems and focus in one of them, say the conventional intensive system, through the various phases of the life of the animal we are interested in. So here focus on the gestation phase, and you can click on this and try to understand here the harms that the animals endure in each of these phases. Here we have time spent with different problems, with skin inflammations, swelling, hunger, etc. This is a prototype, it's not ready yet. Or you can check what is happening with the video, you know. And so on. Let's see. And then you can get text explanations and so on. Let's see if I can move to the other slide. It's usually a problem. No. Just a sec. Let's see. How can I? Okay. Okay, so once we have this mapping and we have identified each of the welfare issues that the animal we are interested in endures in the period we are interested in, then we can quantify how much suffering is embedded in that experience. And the way we do it is by using a metric that we call cumulative pain. Cumulative pain stands for cumulative time experienced in negative affective states, physical or psychological, of different intensities. So as you can see here, we use the term pain very broadly as a shorthand for any negative affective experience state. So anything that feels unpleasant, hunger, thirst, the pain associated with the disease, with the frustration from behavior deprivation, boredom, fracture pain, etc., etc. And time in pain is, or time in an unpleasant state, is a universal measure that can be applied to any sentient creature, really. So you can use it for chickens, shrimp, fish, wild animals, or even humans. So if you want to know more about the metric, we have this book chapter, Cumulative Measurement of Comparative Measurements of Animal Welfare, that is available in this book, which is freely available in the Welfare Footprint website. You can check it there. But as you can see from this definition, we focus on the two main dimensions of the pain experience, of the unpleasant experience, which is duration and intensity. So how bad it is, how uncomfortable, how unpleasant it feels, and how long it lasts. And for us, it makes sense to focus on these two dimensions because we understand them as the main dimensions of pain experiences. There are other attributes of pain, the texture of pain, the quality of pain, the type of pain, or uncertainty about pain, past experience, etc., etc. But these are mostly modulators of these two dimensions, duration and intensity. I always say that if you want to imagine the worst possible suffering in the world, a good answer is that with the highest possible intensity, endure for the longest possible duration. So it makes sense to us to focus on these two dimensions. And this is one of the main differences with the other welfare assessment models that already are available. Time has been mostly ignored in the animal welfare sciences for a number of reasons, both in terms of inclusion of duration in the models themselves and in terms of data collection efforts. So we don't know much about how long each problem lasts, when they start, etc. There is an exception, which is the risk assessment model of the European Food Safety Authority. They do focus on duration and intensity, as well as the prevalence of the problem at the population level, which is something that we also do. But then they convert this into scores and force scores into a linear scale and make scores relative to each of the scenarios they are analyzing. So in the end, the measures are not comparable across scenarios, across the species, and so on. So we keep duration and intensity unconverted to any score or any other measure. Okay, so how do we measure pain intensity and duration? The way we do it is by using a notation tool that we developed and named Pain Track. I use it here for an example with humans. So you have here the description as related, as described by a patient, of the pain associated with a bone fracture. And in the vertical axis here, you have intensity of pain in 4 categories. And in the horizontal axis, you have duration of pain, in the same way as music notation. So in the beginning, the person describes pain as being very intense. Then you have a period that the limb is still very inflamed. There is inflammation, and inflammation is still associated with intense pain. But then as the healing process starts, pain gradually subsides until it ceases to exist. So this is a very simple way for a physician, a doctor, a nurse to take note of the pain of a patient. And it's also the way we use for animals, but we use a slightly different version in which there is more uncertainty about the duration and the intensity of the pain, because of course you have non-verbal subjects, which are the animals. So here we call this the chance mode. You attribute probabilities to each of the intensity categories, and I will discuss this in more details, how we do it. And instead of having a fixed time, we have uncertainty ranges for the durations here. Okay. So with the animals, we also have these 4 intensity categories that goes, actually it's 5, because it goes from no pain to excruciating pain. So we would have a 5th category, no pain, before annoying pain. So we have annoying pain, which is just, as the name says, as an annoyance, a discomfort. Animals with annoying pain can still enjoy positive experiences. They can still play. Their attention is not so much disrupted. Cognition is not impaired. You wouldn't see any major departure from physiological, for physiological indicators from the baseline levels, etc. It's really just a mild discomfort. Hurtful pain you do have some disruption of the ability of individuals to function optimally and to conduct their routine activities. So there is some disruption of behavior or typical behaviors of the animal over a day or over the periods they have this pain. There's some more awareness of the pain, but the animal can still conduct the routine activities. They can still enjoy some forms of positive welfare, even though there is reduced alertness, reduced attention to these other activities, because pain is it's somehow distressing. We have more formal categories. This is just for giving you an idea of how we go about classifying each level of pain. Now, disabling pain, as the name says, is disabling. It takes priority over most other behaviors, so it prevents nearly all forms of positive welfare. There's drastic changes in activity levels. It would be a pain that if it happened in humans, it would put you in bed, for example. For this pain to be relieved, you need higher drug dosages of painkillers or psychotropic drugs, and or more powerful drugs. And we should not mix the term with a disability that is not painful. It's just the pain that is disabling. And then excruciating pain, as the name says, is excruciating. It's an extreme intensity of pain that we use very, very cautiously in the analysis. Here, this is the type of pain, for example, of being burned alive or being tortured. So for us to classify, to give some probability to excruciating pain, there needs to be a strong evidence that the pain is really extremely intense. And just clarifying, some people say, well, but you cannot really assess the subjective experiences of animals, they are non-verbal, so how can you attribute intensity of pain to a given problem, to an animal, to an invertebrate, for example, or how long it's enduring pain? And it's important to clarify that any form of welfare assessment, really, or any attempt to improve the welfare of animals is already based on this assumption that you can access their subjective affective experiences. So, for example, when you demand increased space for an animal, or you assume that reduced stocking density will be better, or access to pasture, or different sort of stunning technique, or anything really, or even when you attempt to assess their welfare, you are already assuming to have some knowledge of what is beneficial to their subjective experiences or not. So this is not an assumption that is unique to our method. It pervades all efforts to improve animal welfare and all forms of animal welfare assessment. And the way we do it is by relying on a number of welfare indicators: behavior, physiology, neurology, pharmacology, the effect of drugs, evolutionary reasoning on the adaptive value of more or less intense pain for the issues we are analyzing, knowledge of signaling pathways of neurotransmitters, homologies in manifestations and symptoms of pain in closely related species that gives us clue whether the pain is more or less intense in our species, and so on. And we do it for each of the time segments of the pain track, as I mentioned. So here's a list of a number of welfare indicators. It's not an exhaustive list. There's many, many more indicators that can be used, and each indicator will have more or less validity and reliability, and we take that into account when attributing intensity to the different pain experiences. So I'll give you an example of how we go about doing it using behavior. We do it for other classes of indicator as well, physiology, neurology, etc. So for example, we ask questions and compare the answers to the criteria defining each of the intensity categories. So for example, Are important activities disrupted by pain? Let's say that we wanted to analyze the pain associated with a wound in a shrimp, and we would analyze the behavior of the shrimp and compare it with the baseline behavior, the typical behavior. So is there disruption of typical activities? No, partially, drastically. So if there's drastic disruption, there is some indication that pain might be disabling or excruciating, or even though we cannot rule out hurtful. Is cognition impaired by pain? Is there any positive welfare possible? Do we have to use very potent drugs to return behavior to normal? And depending on the answers, we can rule out one or the other intensity categories. So we have many, many questions that we ask for each of the major categories of welfare indicators. And I'll give you a concrete example that I hope makes it clearer. So this is an example that we typically use, bone fractures in egg-laying hens, and we wanted to understand how much suffering is associated with one Q bone fracture that heals properly. Most egg-laying hens, commercial egg-laying hens, will endure at least one fracture of the Q bone over their lives. So most laying hens will endure this type of experience. And we start with a pain track like this one, where we have 5 time segments, point of fracture, a number of phases for the inflammatory response, and the formation of the callus, the bone callus. And we estimate the duration of each segment based on studies of fracture healing, inflammatory process in avian models of pain, and in other species as well. So this is an estimate based on the literature. And for intensity, we also use multiple lines of evidence. So for example, in avian models of fracture pain, there's substantial changes in behavior and alertness on the first hour after the fracture, even with high doses of analgesia. So this is compatible with the criteria defining disabling pain. And in humans, a strong analgesia is required to alleviate pain at this stage, again, compatible with disabling pain. We do that for a number of lines of evidence, and then we end up with a table like this. For this one, we had a longer table. This is just a sample. And then with this table, we attribute probabilities based on what a number of people guess that will be the probability of pain being excruciating, disabling, hurtful, or annoying. And in this case, we reach this conclusion that the pain is more likely to be disabling, but we cannot rule out the probability of hurtful pain completely. So this is based on consensus after all the evidence has been reviewed. And once we have this for all the time segments, the probability of pain being of different intensities, then calculating cumulative time in pain is relatively simple. We just multiply the probability by the duration, and you get this result. You do the same for hurtful pain, and you get this result. And you do the same for all cells, and you get the time in pain due to each of these processes. And then you add up everything together, and you get cumulative time in disabling pain, hurtful pain, and annoying pain in hours. So this is how long a laying hen spends in pain of different intensities due to one heel bone fracture that heals properly. You can do this for fractures, for fear, for hunger, for psychological harms as well. We use the same criteria for psychological problems as we do for physical problems, etc. If you're interested, right now we are building a pain track to estimate the suffering due to asphyxiation in fish. This is possibly the most, the single source of suffering that affects the highest number of vertebrates, so affects fish, both in captured fish and farm fish. And if you want to go to the document and see how we are going about calculating this, and even participating, criticizing, contributing, etc., you are most welcome. So I hope the QR code works. Okay, so let's see. Yeah. Well, we do it for individuals. So I just calculated the time in pain due to a single fracture, but we can do it for populations. So we do it for individuals for a single point in time. For a period, we add up the pain from multiple harms, but we can also do it for a population. So we can estimate the cumulative time in pain experienced by the average population member. That's what we typically do, but also for the individuals affected by the extreme forms of suffering. So those carrying the heaviest burden of suffering in a population, hotspots of suffering. And for example, to calculate the suffering for the average population member, we take the prevalence of each problem into account. So for example, in farmed fish, hypoxia is widespread. Most fish will experience it to some extent during their lives, while a disease affects fewer individuals. So we take that into account. Giving an example here, cumulative time in disabling pain experienced by shrimp infected with white spot syndrome virus. So we developed a pain track for this disease in shrimp, and we estimated that the time in disabling pain, in this very intense pain, for each affected shrimp was 36 to 72 hours. Then we estimated the prevalence of shrimps affected by fatal outcomes. Here, I'll use just a simple example. This is not the true prevalence, but just to simplify, an average of 10% of the shrimp are affected by this disease. So why is the time in pain endured by the average shrimp in the population due to this disease? We just multiply this by 10%. So the average shrimp in this population, which is not a real shrimp, endures 3.6 to 7.2 hours of disabling pain due to this disease. So this is how we calculate it for populations, and then we can compare different systems, different policies, and so on. Why do we like this metric, and why do we use it? It's not that we are in love with this metric. If there is anything better that comes up, we will be gladly replacing it. But so far, we haven't found anything. The reason we are using it is because it focuses on affective experiences, so time and intensity of unpleasant states. And I'm sure there will be a question of positive welfare. We can do the same for positive welfare as well. We can have cumulative pleasure instead of cumulative pain, so we can have both measures. Because it uses a universal metric with biological meaning, time, so it's applicable across species and situations, and it's easily understandable. It enables comparing different things, as I said. The estimates are really hypotheses about intensity and duration of each problem that the animal endures, and these hypotheses are explicit and they are amenable to criticism, and they can and should be updated as new knowledge comes about or more people get involved in making these estimates. And these improvements can be constant and decentralized, so similar to crowdsourcing. Vladi is developing a platform where people will be able to develop pain tracks in like in a crowdsourcing way and contribute. Different people can contribute to the same pain track and criticize hypotheses and include new lines of evidence. So this is how we are aiming to achieve this constant and decentralized system for improvement of these estimates. We're also writing a paper where we more formally define the properties of this metric in terms of, validity, feasibility, correctness, coverage, etc. I will not bore you with these details, but it will be available soon. And just summarizing, we have 3 levels of analysis here. One is a notation system, which is the pain track. And the pain track is really this, just a platform, a notation platform for you to make hypotheses explicit about duration and intensity and the uncertainty associated with it. Then from this, we calculate cumulative pain for a single harm, for multiple harms, for a period of life. It's just a sum, or for a whole population or more populations. And once we have cumulative pain, so cumulative time, negative affective states, we can calculate welfare footprint. So how much suffering is embedded in each unit of animal source product or in each intervention and so on. And for that, we need to have this measure of cumulative welfare loss, which is cumulative pain, and divided by the productivity of the system we are looking at. So by each kilo of meat, liter of milk, etc. When calculating welfare footprint, we need to be really comprehensive and include all life fates in the production chain. So for the egg, for example, let's say we want to calculate the welfare footprint of an egg, how much suffering is embedded in each egg. We need to consider the breeders, the male chicks that are slaughtered with 1 day of life, the pullets, the laying hens, the animals that die before slaughter, etc. And for each of these animals, we need to map all the harms that they endure and quantify how much suffering is associated with each of these harms. Now, some applications of the method. You may have seen the work on the egg-laying hens. We wanted to understand if, due to potentially greater frequency of challenges, such as aggression, fractures, infectious disease, in cage-free scenarios, hens could experience worse welfare in cage-free settings. And even if welfare is better in cage-free environments, we wanted to know how much better it is. So we wanted to understand the impact in terms of suffering averted of the cage-free campaigns. The results are in this book that you have in the website, and charts as well. And we analyzed a set of welfare challenges. This is not comprehensive, but these are the welfare challenges that would be affected by the transition to cage-free settings. So fractures, wounds, cannibalism, nesting, a number of behavioral deprivation, nesting, movement, foraging, etc., depopulation, and transport. And the results can be found in the website. There are interactive charts as well. And what we found, and this is just a very simple summary, is that cage-free aviaries are clearly superior to conventional and furnished cages. You have at least 60% less time in pain of the different intensities for every laying hen raised in an aviary instead of a cage. And this is a very conservative estimate. Had we included more welfare challenges in the analysis, this estimate of the benefit of the transition would be higher, and we justify it in the book. And here a graph showing the hours in pain that are spent, excruciating pain, disabling, hurtful, and annoying, by the laying hens in the average laying hen in conventional cage, furnished cage, and the cage-free aviaries, with no access outdoor, so indoor aviaries. And you have a reduction in most cases. Here, in terms of excruciating pain, there's not much of a difference between furnished cages and cage-free aviaries, but note that the scales are very different. So here, 0.04 hours, and here you have 400 or 4,000 or 6,000. And what we see here, we see some patterns, for example, in terms of the time in disabling pain that the hen still experience in the cage-free setting. Most of this time is due to fractures. So keel bone fractures are still a major welfare concern in cage-free settings, even though it's much less time in disabling pain. It's also in terms of hurtful pain. Here in pink, in purple, you have that acute peritonitis is the main issue leading to excruciating pain in all types of housing systems, and this is somewhat ignored in animal welfare sciences, and a number of other findings that you can see in the website. So I just highlighted this one because I think this is very much ignored. And the reason for egg peritonitis leading to excruciating pain, it's because this is a leaking of egg material into the abdominal cavity or the oviduct that may get contaminated and lead to systemic infection, sepsis, And sepsis is a very painful condition. And sepsis can happen as a consequence of peritonitis or any other infectious disease, really. It's a major cause of carcass contamination in broilers, and it's extremely painful, and people are not really paying attention to this, even though it's a hotspot of suffering in the production chain. In terms of hens in cages, most of the time, the longer time in pain stems predominantly from the deprivation of highly motivated behaviors, so nesting, foraging, exploration, perching, and we're still not even considering the lack of agency, the lack of choice that they have in cages. So had we considered this, the time in pain in cages would be even higher, longer. Also, we studied the welfare of broilers, and the question that we wanted to address in this case was the extent to which how much suffering could be averted by setting genetic limits to the growth rate of broiler chickens, so by replacing fast-growing breeds by slower-growing breeds. And in doing so, we wanted to know if a longer life of these slower-growing breeds under conditions that are still not ideal would lead to more suffering because they are living 2 weeks longer. And the scenario we analyzed was this. For the conventional fast-growing breeds, we analyzed the average daily gain in the US and Europe, which is about 60 grams per day, reaching a slaughter weight of 2.5 kilos at 42 days. And in the reformed scenario, lower growth rate, reaching the same weight, but at 56 days of life. So this is a 33% longer life. And we analyzed also a number of welfare challenges, gait impairment conditions, lameness, cardiorespiratory challenges, thermal stress, deprivation of motivated behaviors, chronic hunger in the breeders, and the challenges associated with different stunning methods. And what we found was a major effect of breed. Most of the welfare harms that broilers endure have a chronic nature associated with the genetics for fast growth, and the adoption of these slower growing breeds reduces the incidence of these offenses, of these problems, delays their onset, so these problems start later in life, much later in life, because of the better genetics, so number of risk factors are reduced, and by starting later in life, the animals spend a shorter time in pain rather than a longer time in pain, even though they live longer. So what we found is that the adoption of slower growing breeds reduced the time in hurtful, disabling, and excruciating pain by 24, 66, and 78%. So you can see it here, excruciating, disabling, hurtful, and annoying pain in both scenarios, and the colors indicate the different challenges. Lameness in orange is still a major welfare concern for broilers in both cases. And one thing I wanted to say is that these estimates are also very conservative. Had we included more challenges, the differences would be even larger than what we found. The idea here in the Laneham work was to be extremely conservative to avoid criticism by the industry that we were exaggerating the benefits of these campaigns, of this reform. So we prefer to err on the side of caution and be conservative than to include challenges that are not always a challenge in some production system and be criticized for exaggerating the problems. But on average, the estimates are extremely conservative.
Okay, everyone, so thank you for watching. I'm finishing the recording, and I would like to know if you'd like to follow with questions.
Yeah, that was awesome. It looks like Bethany has a question. This was a very interesting topic. I work for a research organization where we perform preclinical biocompatibility testing one of the things our facility struggles with is the use of USDA pain and distress categories, which run from category B to E. I do not feel that these categories accurately represent the level of pain and distress that the animals may experience, and may also be misleading to the public. What are your thoughts on these categories? How did you account for animals that are known to hide pain, like rodents? In addition to behavioral aspects, did you review physiological changes as well?
Yeah, so the way we do it is by using a number of indicators to infer, to estimate the intensity of the pain the animals are using. So anything from behavior is a good one, really, how the animals, struggle, show pain-specific indicators, stop eating or stop, moving about, etc. But also there's like facial expressions, there's departures from physiological baseline. Physiology is usually not that good because it works mostly for acute conditions. And for chronic conditions, you may return physiological levels to the baseline and the animal may still be in pain. And they're not so specific. You can have a departure from baseline, even if the animal is like in excitement from a positive experience. You also have evolutionary reasoning, the effect of drugs, etc. I don't know the scale you mentioned well, but what we are thinking of doing now is to translate a number of scales that exist to our system of classifying pain in these 4 levels, or 5 from no pain to excruciating. So this could be a possibility. And these are levels that the general public understands. So anyone understand what an annoyance is, an annoying pain, or anyone understand what an excruciating pain is. So this would be a possibility. Sorry, I'm getting short of it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I was wondering about the USDA scale too, and I don't know if Bethany is willing to answer this question, but like if an experiment requires that the animal be euthanized, but like the euthanasia doesn't cause any pain and distress, just so you can harvest the organs or whatever, would that potentially be a lower category than something that would keep the animal alive but require multiple injections or procedures or something like that?
Yeah, so that's a very important question, Crystal, because what we are analyzing here with this method is suffering, really.
Mm.
So physical or psychological pain of different intensities, how long the animals spends in pain of these different intensities, or in pleasure. We also have a method for calculating cumulative pleasure. But we are analyzing suffering.
Mm-hmm.
We are not analyzing the value of life, like the moral or ethical value of life, which is a different thing. And it's like more like a value judgment. It's a moral, decision, how much you attribute to the value of life. So we are not saying this is not important. It's just that the method is specific to calculating, to quantifying suffering. I don't know if this answers your question.
No, that makes sense. I wonder, is it a concern that if this is adopted, then it would lead to people to be like, well, it's better than to kill them than to prolong their life or something like that?
Well, with the prolongation of life, you would have more time because life is not perfect. You would have more time suffering, mm-hmm. But we also calculate time in positive affective states. So you would also have more time in pleasurable states. Mm-hmm. And then the decision on whether this compensates for a death earlier in life, it's something that we leave to the organizations, to the decision makers, etc. So if you say, look, this animal had 10 days in horrible suffering and died, and the other animal had, let's say, 100 days in more moderate suffering and then died, how decide which one is worse and better? Because this is so far, could change in the future. But this is not a scientific decision. We leave it to the people who are close to the animals to decide. I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Bethany, did you have any further follow-up questions or anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very interesting way to put it. In my organization, we always try to default to earlier euthanasia because we don't want any excess or extra animals sitting in our facility in a laboratory clinical setting any longer than necessary. So we usually defer to, as soon as they are done with their experiment, that we should humanely euthanize. But, I didn't think about it the other way of potentially extending their life with positive experiences that could kind of outweigh any of the negative impacts they've had. And also going back to the USDA pain and distress categories, really the assumption is that from category B to E, you are working from the least amount of pain up to the highest potential amount of pain. But category B is reserved for animals that are in a breeding colony. And I think a lot of people forget that breeding can be very distressful itself. And so when you hear that an animal is category B, you really shouldn't be thinking, oh, they didn't have any pain or suffering associated with them. So I like the idea of you guys trying to kind of transition your kind of scale over to other commonly known categories like the USDA ones, because then I think it would more accurately represent what the animals are truly experiencing.
Yeah, I think that it doesn't make sense to have different scales for different types of animals, what we call life fates, because pain is pain and pain intensity is pain intensity. So we have these four categories, four categories for everything that we do, from shrimp to humans. It's the same time in annoying pain or disabling pain. So we can even compare across species. You may say, well, disabling pain in humans is different from disabling pain in cows or in chickens or in rodents. But then you're going to have to justify why. And because the criteria for defining disabling pain or annoying pain or excruciating pain is exactly the same. And I think that you mentioned the breeders, and it's funny because we estimated suffering and the amount of suffering that some breeders go through. So broiler breeders and the sows, the female breeders of the pigs. And in the case of chickens, for example, the breeders are possibly the animal enduring the highest amount of suffering in their lives, because they have a longer life, and they go through chronic hunger, and they go through a number of extra challenges that the let's say the market animal, or in your case the research animal, doesn't go through. So breeders really have it tough. The same for pigs. I don't know in the case of the rodent breeders, but I imagine it could be something like this. So we're even planning on writing a book called The Plight of Mothers, because this is where, at least in the animal agriculture industry, this is where, this is a hot spot of suffering. For dairy cows, it's the same. So or even for female shrimp, the breeders of, the shrimp, it's a horrible life. So I think it's funny that they are in a milder category, because when you quantify it, their suffering is like orders of magnitude larger, higher than the suffering of market animals.
Oh, interesting. Wow. I wonder, what are your future projects for quantifying animal suffering? Like, I'm envisioning do gas chambers versus electric stunning of pigs, and ventilation shutdown versus other methods of depopulation. Do you plan to do
Yeah, ventilation shutdown would be a nice one. We did calculate, we have a page in our website calculating the impact of different stunning techniques for broilers. So gas chambers and, you know, the electrical water bath. We didn't do this for pigs. And right now we are working on fish because of the scale of the problems, like suffering in the trillions. But we are a small team and we cannot analyze every single problem in every single species. So what we're doing is teaching the method to groups, to researchers, to universities, so they can use the method to quantify suffering for the problems they are interested in. So if other people start doing it, then you can use this metric that is common to different species, to different situations, and compare suffering, you know, across the board. So what we really wish is that other people start adopting the method and apply it to their own research questions.
That's excellent. It just started raining here on my car and it might be a little bit loud. Does anybody else have any other questions? I mean, I'm kind of like wanting to play with these numbers myself and like look at maybe doing some sort of project. I think it'd be a great project for vet students to consider.
Let me tell you this: next Wednesday, in 2 days, we'll be giving a talk, like an open office hour, where we'll be like just summarizing the method in 10 minutes and teaching how to use an AI tool that we built, so to generate the first analysis for whatever problem you're interested in. So let's say you want to calculate the suffering associated with ventilation shutdown. You go to this GPT, like custom GPT, you ask, what is the suffering associated with ventilation shutdown? And you have a first draft of the analysis and of the numbers. Of course, it's initial. It must be revised by an expert. It's just so you don't start like with a blank page, because we know it's not the same. But it's a start, so this could be a possibility. I can send you the link to the talk afterwards.
Yeah, that would be great. Or post in the chat if that's cool. But yeah, and Bethany says, do you also plan to eventually touch on ethical aspect of animal use, market animals in research, etc.?
Yeah, well, I worked with this in the past, you know, arguing against the use of animals in research. But right now, we are mostly concentrated, because like this is a huge work, and so the work of 10 lifetimes, on this quantification of suffering. And for the moment, like in the short term, we do not plan on discussing these moral or more ethical questions. Our plan is mostly to provide tools to researchers and advocates so they can use this in their own, you know, campaigns and, you know, research, etc. So no plans for now.
Yeah, and it's always the problem of when you're like doing something science-based and then you start talking about ethics, people start accusing you of having an agenda and stuff. So I can see the thing.
They already do. They already do.
All right. Any other?
Sometimes I wonder that if really people like the FDA or organizations like the FDA really take these types of aspects into account, because again, I'm coming from an animal research background and we're doing a lot of this biocompatibility testing to get things out onto the market and FDA approved, right? And a lot of the testing that we perform, I mean, these were experiments that were developed in the 60s and 70s, and there hasn't been a lot of changes to them. And it just makes me wonder about whether or not what we're doing truly has value in the end. You know, is this actually going to be translational into the human aspect? Is what we're doing in the animal truly reflecting what happens in humans, and is it worthwhile doing? So sometimes I wonder whether the FDA needs to be taking a little bit more leaps and bounds, kind of in the way that Europe has in discontinuing animal testing.
Yeah, so I think there's two aspects to it. The question of the validity and generalizability of the results to humans is a huge one, we have cured cancer in rats hundreds of times, and that doesn't mean it's applicable necessarily to humans. So that's one thing. But even in those cases where you get value from the research, what we think is that by measuring suffering in this way, you can quantify the amount of harm you're causing to the research animals against using the same metric, the amount of harm that you can avert in humans using the same metric. And you can compare. So, okay, I'm causing 10 times less harm in animals than potentially I could save in humans because, you know, I don't know, this is like a painkiller that people will stop having pain of some kind, or the other way around. I mean, this is, I don't know, this sort of disease that affects a small percentage of the population, not so painful, and yet we are inflicting all this suffering, and you give a number, to animals, to something that is not so, that doesn't cause the same magnitude of suffering in humans. So this could be something that could be used, and it's open to scrutiny, to discussion, to criticism, because you have all the estimates very open. So this is another potential use for this framework.
Excellent. This is so interesting. And I know we're a little bit over, so I don't want to take up too much of your time, but any other questions? Otherwise, I'll close it. Bethany? Anybody else? Alrighty then. Thank you all so much. And oh shoot, you know what I didn't do? I didn't give you my survey because I was so enthralled with the whole thing. I need to give you all my little CE survey here. So I'm posting the link in the chat here. Grab that, fill that out. If you, for some reason, are not on the chat right now and need it, you can email me at info@ourhonor.org and donate if you can, Venmo at ourhonor or ourhonor.org/donate. And oh, got the other link here. I'm gonna grab that. All right, thank you all. And you all have a lovely day. Thank you so much, Cynthia.
Thank you so much. And here's the link to the talk on the AI tool in case you want to have a look at that.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye-bye.